old age, sickness, and death is very much part of life, regardless of whether you're a monastic, a layperson, a human being, an animal, beautiful or ugly. Everybody is subject to that very basic principle of life. With birth comes death. And as we know, the Buddha very frequently corrected and suggested and recommended for us to reflect on our own mortality, on the brevity of life, isn't it? So then, how often are you recollecting your own brevity of life? That the death could come at any time? How often are you undertaking that practice? Once a year? Every year at the birthday, you see, oh, another year has passed. So at that time, it can be a bit of a reminder. It's true. Any other occasions? Maybe Chinese New Year. And 1st of January. But then, do you think it's enough? Is this what the Buddha meant? Like once a year, twice a year? Well, it depends. Maybe better than nothing. But actually, probably the more often, the better. Because we have a tendency to forget and become again complacent and forget about the essence of life, and also that our life is not lasting forever. So that's why we sometimes tend to spend time in activities that are actually not really important, that actually are mainly just a waste of time. So if you were to know, wow, today is my last day, tomorrow I will die, how would you spend your last few hours? The same as usual, Facebook, watching TV, cooking show, Korean movie, or would you do something else? Most likely we would choose to do something else, isn't it? Maybe we would meet with family or with friends, or express our gratitude for some of our family members, parents, teachers, children, whatever. Or maybe we would even meditate and prepare ourselves for this difficult period, for death that could come at any time. So, but surely we would do something different from what would be our normal daily routine, and sometimes useful, but also sometimes time-wasting activities, isn't it? So there's an interesting sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya where different monks express how they practice death contemplation. And then the Buddha, at the end, he comments which of those he regards as suitable, on which he does not regard as sufficient. Let's have a look at that. The sutta is found in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of 6, Sutta number 19, Mindfulness of Death. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Nadika in the brick hall. The brick hall. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus. Bhikkhus, whenever sir, those bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this: Bhikkhus, mindfulness of death, when developed and cultivated, is of great fruit, of great benefit, culminating in the deathless, having the deathless as its consummation. So, what is the deathless? Don't die anymore? Nibbana. So it's a nice play with words. Contemplating of death, what's our modality, has the deathless as its final destination. So you won't die anymore. How nice. But do you, bhikkhus, develop mindfulness of death? When this was said, one bhikkhu said to the Blessed One, Bhante, I develop mindfulness of death. Yes, I do. Then the Buddha asks him. He doesn't say straight away, sadhu, sadhu, very good. He says, but how, bhikkhu, do you develop mindfulness of death? Then the monk says, here, Bhante, I think thus. May I live just a night and day, so that I may attend to the Blessed One's teaching. I could then accomplish much. It is in this way that I develop mindfulness of death. So he thinks, if I could at least live another day, another night only, so that I can hear the Buddha's teachings, and this would be to my benefit. So in this way he contemplates the importance of life, of being able to hear the Dhamma, and in this way derive benefit. Even if it's just the last day, he would, it seems, dedicate his time towards hearing the Dhamma and in this way make good use of the remaining hours. Sounds quite good, huh? Not so bad. But we will see later what the Buddha has to say about this. Another bhikkhu said to the Blessed One, I do, Bhante, I develop mindfulness of death. But how, bhikkhu, do you develop mindfulness of death? Here, Bhante, I think, may I just live a day so that I may attend to the Blessed One's teaching. I could then accomplish much. It is in such a way that I develop mindfulness of death. So what is the difference between this one and the previous one? This one sounds very similar, no? If you listen carefully, the previous one said, may I live just a night and day. And this one says, may I live just a day. So he takes a shorter time frame. He considers, well, I could die even by the end of this day. Not just by the end of this day and night, but it could be even sooner than that. Still another bhikkhu said to the Blessed One, I also practice mindfulness of death. How do you do it? The Buddha asks. Here, Bhante, I think, may I just live the length of time it takes to eat a single alms meal, so that I may attend to the Blessed One's teaching. I could then accomplish much. It's in such a way that I develop mindfulness of death. So he contemplates that he could die even within the short period it takes to take a meal. So maybe the sense of urgency will be higher or lower with him compared to the other two. Higher, isn't it? Because he thinks, well, who knows when? It could be just during the time when I'm eating a meal, that duration. How long will they take? Well, it depends on how slow you eat. Maybe you can postpone death if you just eat very slowly. That would be nice. For some people, I think they are doing that already. So a meal can take 1 hour, 2 hours, but the monks usually not. In fact, there are some places, some monasteries, where we all were supposed to watch the senior monk, and whenever the senior monk is finished with his meal, the whole Sangha is supposed to be finished. And that senior monk was quite old already, Lungta Mahapua in Thailand. Of course, a 70, 80, almost 90-year-old person, he needs actually very little food. Cannot compare to a 20-year-old young man. Anyway, when he was finished, everybody had to stop. So, from experience, they already know, it takes him about 7 to 10 minutes. And this is your only meal a day, you know. So you can imagine how the young ones are shoveling it down at high speed. I don't know to what degree this is healthy, if you hasten your meal so much. But somehow also they manage to survive and get it done, and became a bit of a tradition in that place. They eat very fast. And then some other places, they are much more moderate, mindful, slow in taking their consumption of food. It's also okay. We don't have actually any Vinaya rules around that. So your maximum duration is defined. How? Well, you could start already at sunrise in the morning. That's the earliest you can start. And then you have to finish by noon time. So it means you have time from 7 until almost 1 o'clock. So there should be enough for everyone. You can have a 5-course meal. So this monk is contemplating that just within the duration of a single meal, he could pass away. Still another bhikkhu said to the Blessed One, I do, Bhante, develop mindfulness of death. Buddha again asks, how are you doing that? Here, Bhante, I think, may I live just the length of time it takes to chew and swallow 4 or 5 mouthfuls of food, so that I may attend to the Blessed One's teachings. I could then accomplish much. So just 4 or 5 mouthfuls, it's a few minutes, huh? So he contemplates in this way. And then the next one says, also he's doing the same, but slightly different. May I live just the length of time it takes to chew and swallow a single mouthful of food. Wow, it's just a few seconds, huh? And then the last one is number 6. Still another bhikkhu said to the Blessed One, I do, Bhante, develop mindfulness of death. How do you do that? Here, Bhante, I think, may I live just the length of time it takes to breathe out after breathing in, or to breathe in after breathing out, so that I may attend to the Blessed One's teaching. I could then accomplish much. It is in this way that I develop mindfulness of death. So they have all now shared from their experiences how they are doing mindfulness of death, all the way from I could die today or tomorrow in the morning, or just today, or the time it takes to eat a meal, or just a few mouthfuls, all the way down. I could die within the next in-breath or out-breath. So then the Buddha was patiently listening to the whole thing, like you. And then he says, when this was said, the Blessed One said to those bhikkhus, bhikkhus, the bhikkhu who develops mindfulness of death thus, may he live just a night and a day, so that they may attend to the Blessed One's teaching, and so on. And also the one who develops mindfulness, thinking, may he live just a day. And also the one who develops mindfulness of death, thinking, may he live just the length of time it takes to eat a single alms meal. And also the one who develops mindfulness of death, may he live just the length of time it takes to chew and swallow 4 or 5 mouthfuls. These are called, so these first categories, these are called bhikkhus who dwell heedlessly. He calls them heedless. What? You take yourself so much time, I could die tomorrow or the next night afterwards. This is too long a time frame. There's more urgency than that. Don't take it so easy. So the Buddha says these first few people, they're dwelling heedlessly. Yes, they're doing some death contemplation, but not urgently enough. They develop mindfulness of death sluggishly for the destruction of the Danes, the Buddha says. But, number 5, the bhikkhu who develops mindfulness of death, thinking, may I just live the length of time it takes to chew and swallow a single mouthful of food. This one and also the last one, who thinks, may I live just the length of time it takes to breathe out after breathing in, or to breathe in after breathing out, I could then accomplish much. These are called bhikkhus who dwell heedfully. They develop mindfulness of death keenly for the destruction of the Danes. Therefore, bhikkhus, you should train yourselves thus. We will dwell heedfully, we will develop mindfulness of death keenly for the destruction of the Danes. Thus you should train yourselves. So you can see here the level that the Buddha is expecting from the monks, not to be okay, I will die at some point, but not so soon. Who knows when it's going to happen. So it's almost like, of course, it doesn't mean that you will die sooner just because you think about it, but you kind of imagine yourself being in a situation close to death. How would that feel? Would the mind be ready to let go? Because obviously we cannot take anything with us, can we? Cannot take our property along, cannot take our friends along, our family, nothing. Our jobs, our achievements, diplomas. But then what comes along for the ride? Then nothing? Then the whole life was for no use also, right? Is there anything that transcends death, that moves on? Karma, the good and bad deeds, the karmic energy from our wholesome and unwholesome actions. These are the ones who will produce corresponding results in the future. So in this way you will be the heir of your own actions that you have done now. So this is your true heritage, you can say. Not actually the heritage you get from your parents or grandparents, but your own karma. This is the only thing that you can really bring along and of which you will be the heir. So a person being concerned about his or her own future should invest well his time or money and energy in what? Maybe not in cars, airplanes and property, but in good deeds, in wholesomeness, in kindness, generating of wisdom, mindfulness, because it's these qualities that will find a continuation in the next life and produce corresponding results, the good karma, as well as, of course, the unwholesome karma. So bringing the shortness and brevity of life back into memory is a very good tool to remind ourselves, oh, life is short. So now most of us, I can see you're not in your teens anymore, so maybe even have transcended maybe the midpoint of life. So okay, we are still young enough to be energetic, to do things and to learn new things. But there will come a time when learning and meditating, cultivating the mind becomes more and more difficult. It doesn't become easier. So therefore, it's quite eminent that we should develop some of our time, or the more the better, of course, but at least some of our time for spiritual development, to prepare ourselves and prepare the mind for whatever may come afterwards. Because obviously those things that we have now, most of those we can't take along. But then if we cultivate not just once a week, but on a regular basis, on a daily basis, small acts of kindness, of generosity, of helpfulness, of service, that good energy, that karma, will produce the corresponding results in the future. So this is how you prepare yourselves for the future. Whereas not even an insurance, a life insurance, or fire insurance, water insurance, none of that can really protect you. Even though the insurance company will tell you, yes, it will protect you, but it protects you only from the calamities happening here in the present life. But cannot protect you from the unwholesome karma that may have been accumulated. There's one practice about death contemplation that I often recommend and that I find particularly useful, because also it has this sense of urgency. It's like a countdown. Like in the old days when they were shooting the rockets up to, not to Mars at that time, just up to the moon, then they had a countdown, 10, 9, 8. So you can do also your own countdown, you know. You can count down from 10, imagining that once it reaches 0, your rocket will launch, hopefully into Parinibbana, or maybe somewhere else. So the end of life will be reached once you have reached the countdown, slowly and gradually down to 0. And of course you won't really die on that occasion, most likely not. But just the imagination that it could happen can trigger some interesting thoughts or emotions. And it might show you in your mind that there are some areas where you're not ready to move on, where you're holding on to something or someone. And this is actually quite useful to know what are the things that, when it really comes to that moment, what prevents me from really letting go and taking a new path and moving on with life. So, because once you know, then you also know where to do some work and where to look closely and where there could be some attachments that maybe you have not even noticed that it's there. So this is something you can experiment from time to time. Or we can try together actually. You can close your eyes. Let us close our eyes and relax. Getting ready for the last moments. Okay, so fasten your seatbelt. And then we imagine, we contemplate that within a short time, death may come. And we can make it even more tangible by counting down. So I will do the countdown while every one of us, we are simply imagining that once we reach 0, this will be the end of this life. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Are you still here? Okay. Quite interesting, isn't it? So when you really think well into that situation, sometimes there's a hesitance. No, not yet. A few more seconds, please. The mind not fully ready. And sometimes there comes up an image or a thought about why I'm not ready or what am I trying to hold on. And this can be quite an important and useful thing that comes up here, because it might show you that there's some unfinished business. So you better settle that at some point, because at some point you will be in that situation where a countdown is running and you might have just a few more minutes, a few more seconds. And by that time, hopefully, you are ready. You have settled whatever has to be said, has to be done, and that you're ready to move on. And it's also interesting, if you contemplate that death could happen very soon, how many of the other things that we are doing throughout life, how important are they really? If you think just 10 more seconds, how much time would you now spend watching a movie? Completely irrelevant, isn't it? Or going shopping and just jalan, enjoying oneself. Probably not. So these reflections, it can actually be quite unsettling sometimes. You know, if you've never done that before, it can be quite shocking what is coming up here. But this is a useful way of being shaken a little bit, because it will show you the direction in which you need to go and things where there's some letting go to be done. So don't be afraid of those moments where you contemplate a bit deeper topics. Because yes, it's also nice to do loving kindness and metta and listening to the birds. Yeah, there's also all good practice, no problem with that. But we also have other sides, there's other aspects of existence that we also shouldn't close our eyes, shouldn't close our ears. So, and preparing the mind for that is actually a very useful practice. Because the better you're prepared, the easier it will be. So if you've never been driving a bicycle, you try to ride a bicycle, it's quite hard, quite difficult. Might have an accident. But if you've done it many times, it's not difficult. It's the same with everything. Once you get used to it, have done it, even something difficult, it becomes normal and you're much more ready for that. Like I said in the beginning, when I invite the monks to do a short sharing out here, to give the precepts, yeah, at first might be a bit exciting, but then you get used to that and it becomes very normal. So sometimes it's helpful to deliberately expose ourselves to unpleasant experiences, not just avoid them all the time, but actually deliberately go there, and in this way strengthen the mind and strengthen our capabilities to cope with difficult situations. So contemplating our own modality or the modality of others can be very useful and important from time to time. And in fact, life really gets meaning and value due to its brevity, isn't it? Just imagine life would last forever. Well, on the first glance we would say, well, that's great, you know, you can live forever. But then, now you're already alive for 40, 50, 60 years or more. So then, just imagine life going the same trajectory. Of course, you're also getting older. Okay, you might not die or never be able to die, but then also the body becomes weaker, the ears are not functioning so well anymore, the sight is not so good, have to go to the doctor half the time, but still you cannot die. Just imagine you would have to live 1,000 years, and the body becoming older and older, but just having to drag along. After a while, it's almost like a vegetable only. Still, you cannot pass away. There comes a point where you would have as your main wish in life to be able to die. Because death is not the worst thing that can happen. In fact, from our Buddhist understanding, death is just a transition into another form of life. It's just a momentary ceasing of this current existence and then moving on to another form of life, where the good karma and also the bad karma will produce a corresponding plane that fits to one's karmic makeup. So it's not a big tragedy actually to die. So even though it might feel, oh, something so big is happening, but once, especially the person has grown old already, the body is very weak, then being reborn is actually quite nice for that person probably. Maybe the relatives are suffering, but the person himself gets a new body, is healthy again, and is nothing to be worried about. Any questions or comments? Yes? Of course, there's the uncertainty. You don't have a guarantee where you will be. So, yet on the other side, you can overcome a little bit that fear by reflecting. Well, we already understand what is the kind of karma that leads to a good rebirth, and what is the kind of karma that leads to a not so good rebirth. So then you can think back your life. Okay, how did I spend my time? How much time did I spend killing other people? Well, hopefully not too much. How often a day do I lie? Do I steal? Am I using harsh words? And then how much of my time a day am I doing something good for others? Maybe cooking for family, cleaning the house, coming to a place like this, listening to the Dhamma, or offering food to the monks. These are all wholesome deeds. So if you add them up and see and look back in your life, generally speaking, have you been mostly conducting wholesome things, or have you been mostly engaging in unwholesome activities? I mean, there's nobody who has done only good things. Such a person is not to be found. So you don't have to be expecting yourself to be like a saint. It's not that only saints can come to heaven. So if you have been a decent human being and with your strengths and weaknesses, and then there's a good chance that you will have a favorable rebirth as a human being, or maybe even in a divine celestial plane. But indeed, if you have found yourself mostly crooked and naughty and deliberately trying to harm others, deliberately, not accidentally. Accidentally can happen, this is not unwholesome, but deliberately trying to harm someone. If that is what you've been spending a lot of time with, well, then maybe you have good reasons to be concerned about rebirth. So the Buddha also says to Mahanama, one of the disciples, who was quite concerned, what if he passes away with a mind that is muddled and not wholesome? Because sometimes he goes to town and then there are people dancing and a lot of sense pleasures there. And so he is a bit concerned if he passes away in that moment when the mind is not in a good state, what will be his rebirth? He asks the Buddha. And the Buddha says to him, Mahanama, don't worry. Don't worry. For a person who for a long time cultivated his mind in generosity, in kindness, in wisdom, in learning the Dhamma, his mind will go upwards. It's a natural thing. It's like a law of nature that there will be a good rebirth. So even though in the last moment he might be confused or not at his best, the habitual karma of doing wholesome things will propel him into a good rebirth. So he doesn't have to worry about the last mind moment, because throughout life he has laid so much the foundation for a good rebirth that the last mind moment, don't worry about that. That's what the Buddha taught him. So the same applies to not only Mahanama, but also everyone else. If for the whole life you have been living a good, decent life mostly, you will be fine. And the opposite is also the case. Even though or a person might think, well, the last mind moment seems to be quite important. So actually I don't care what I'm doing throughout my whole life. I can do harmful things, but the last moment I will be really mindful. I will practice loving kindness just at the time of my own death, and then I will have a good rebirth. Will that work? No. Because if you throughout life, all the time, were not even able to keep the mind wholesome, number one, the weight of that last moment will be weaker than the habitual karma. And secondly, if throughout life you have not been able to keep the mind wholesome, calm, serene, really? But then at the time of death you can do it. At the time of death where the body is weak, the mind is weak, you have to say goodbye to all your family, this is the moment where you will be really at your best. Very unlikely. So I would not book my money on the last mind moment, if even during life you find it quite difficult to control the mind. So much more realistic is you keep your normal day-to-day life wholesome and develop good, beautiful, wholesome mental states. Then you don't have to worry when it comes to the last moment. This means next time you do the countdown, 10, 9, 8, you are looking forward. You are looking forward of reaching the number 0. Okay, I'm ready to go. What's taking so long? I'm ready to move on. Because you know deep inside, actually, nothing bad will happen. Yeah. So this is what I wish for all of you, that we can face old age, sickness and death with open eyes, without fear, being ready for it, because we have prepared the mind for that.